In this video, I'm going to talk about interpersonal dynamics, and in particular, I'm going to talk about three kinds of interpersonal dynamics. The kind that occur within a person across different levels of personality, the kind that occur within a situation as an interaction unfolds, and the kind that occur across interactions as the same person interacts with multiple different people in different situations. So first, across levels, this is has been a focus of interpersonal psychology since Timothy Leary wrote about it in the 1950s. This has to do with when two different parts of your interpersonal system or your personality have kind of different styles. So, for example, if you really valued being warm, but when you're warm, you sort of have problems doing it. Or when you value being warm, but you're not particularly good at being warm. Or when you avoid being warm because you know that it creates problems, but as a result, people are cold to you and you're sensitive to other people's coldness. So, this kind of interpersonal dynamic can create a kind of motivational ambivalence or a conflict or an interesting psychological process. And it creates a real need to decouple things like values, traits, sensitivities, problems, etc., in order to try to uncover these kinds of dynamics. Talked about the multi-surface interpersonal assessment in another video, but this is the way that we typically would assess somebody's internal across-level conflicts or dynamics. So in a multi-surface interpersonal assessment, the same person is given measures of things like problems, traits, efficacies, values, sensitivities, and strengths. All of the measures are organized around the interpersonal circumplex, and then scores across these different measures can be compared. So in this person, you see that in the FG octant, that's cold and submissive. Some of their values are really high and some of their values are really low. And so that creates a kind of interesting pattern that is worth thinking more about in terms of thinking about how the person relates to others and thinks about themselves. The second kind of interpersonal dynamic occurs within situations. So this means as you're interacting with another person, different processes are happening. When you're talking to your romantic partner or a friend or a psychotherapist or a patient or whatever, these are the dynamics that are occurring while that interaction unfolds. This image depicts some of the processes that happen while people are interacting with one another. There's two people. Person A is on the left, person B is on the right. Person A acts, that's box one. They have an overt behavior. And then person B has to perceive that behavior. So that's path one. Based on that perception, and there's some kind of impact. The person thinks, oh, that person was dominant or warm or cold or submissive or whatever. That's box two. And then in path two, that perception mixes with person B's own motivations. Well, that person was dominant, but I want to be close. And so the combination of their motivation and their perception of the other produces an overt behavior. Maybe in that case, a warm, submissive behavior, which complements dominance, but also encourages closeness. Typically, that behavior is going to complement the first person's behavior. And then the same processes occur in person A in response, right? And so these things happen continuously, they happen very fast. And so the way that we typically study within situation dynamics and interpersonal psychology is with the CADE method. In the CADE method, raters watch an interaction between two people and they manipulate a joystick device to capture the behavior relatively continuously. So in these two images, you've got warmth and dominance during an interaction that lasted 8 minutes, and you see a complementary pattern where the two people's time series are kind of going up and down together for warmth and going up for dominance while the other person goes down in a kind of reciprocal pattern. Talked about CADE and within situation dynamics in another video that you can check out. Okay, the third kind of dynamic is dynamics that occur across situations. Rather than being about what happens as an interaction unfolds, across situation dynamics are what happens when one person acts in different situations, often with different people. So you behave one way with your relationship partner, a different way with your child, a third way with your coworker, and a fourth way with your psychotherapy patient, for example. Right. So these kinds of dynamics can be really interesting as well because they tell us things like, well, how does context affect behavior? How do different kinds of interpersonal roles or situations affect one's mood, etc. And there's been a lot of work on this kind of dynamic as a function of things like roles, psychopathology, affect, etc. Most of this research uses smartphone devices in which people are told every few hours or a few times a day or every time you have an important interaction or maybe once a day, tell us about what kinds of interactions you had, what you did, what the other person did, what you felt, etc. Now, you can put these three kinds of interactions together into what we call interpersonal signatures. In an interpersonal signature, you kind of have a storyline or a melody of a person's life that characterizes a way that they often interact with one another. And these include all three of the different dynamics that I just talked about. This is from a paper about schizotypal personality, and a sort of prototypical pattern that you might see in a person with that personality style. And in step one, you can see a motivational conflict. There's a kind of cold, distancing motivation, but there's a conflict in agency between wanting to sort of be in control and wanting to be more passive. So that's a within person a conflict across levels, right? That also creates a kind of emotional ambivalence that you can see below it, where there's a sort of low valence emotion, but there's variation in arousal. Well, why would that happen? Well, in step two, what you can see is if I'm the person who has this motivational conflict, I'm misperceiving the other. I'm not perceiving the other person accurately. I might see their bids for warmth to actually be a way for them to try to take advantage or manipulate me. And this then feeds into the fact that I'm not a particularly good appraiser of my own internal motivations. I might not be aware of the way in which my behavior affects others, right? And so this is what triggers the affect, is that my perception of the other and of myself in combination with my conflicted motives makes me kind of anxious and I don't know how to respond. Should I be sort of high arousal or should I be more withdrawal? This then triggers behavioral conflict with the other person. So that's number five here. My behavior is sort of erratic. Sometimes I'm dominant, sometimes I'm cold, sometimes I'm warm, sometimes I'm submissive, and it's not particularly contingent upon the other person. Now, this is typically unsettling for others. Um, and so they sort of have a hard time perceiving what my motives and affects are. What do I want? Why am I behaving in this way? And that causes a sort of low valence, negative, anxious emotion and a motivation to withdraw. So in this pattern, you can see A, conflicts across levels of personality between motives and behaviors, for example, or between different motives. You can see dynamics within the situation. There's sort of an initial bid and a perception, followed by behavior, then followed by the perception of that behavior by the other, followed by their reaction. And the reason it's a signature is that the idea is that this kind of model or pattern replicates across many interactions. And this is the sort of core signature that characterizes a person's problems if they have a schizotypal personality style. So this is how you can use interpersonal assessment to assess different kinds of interpersonal dynamics and then put those dynamic processes together to formulate the sort of a person's way of relating with others in terms of their interpersonal signature. Okay, see you next time. Bye-bye.